Okay guys, I know I said in my last video on the Flat Earth Society that that was all I had to say about the subject. Well, after I released it, I got some fairly rude comments from a guy calling himself Flat Earther. And this kind of got me thinking a little more about this. See, I'd really only considered the Flat Earth model to be kind of an interesting mental exercise, but I'd never really run into anyone who actually believed this stuff. And like I said, it made me think about it a little more. I mean, the flat earth model is intriguing from the perspective that it's something a 5-year-old could understand. It works with anyone's knowledge of the world without any additional scientific training or scientific reading or all these crazy models that scientists have come up with over the years. You don't have to have any of this to understand the flat earth model. In fact, it's pretty similar to what you may have thought the world was like when you were a kid. Let me show you what I'm talking about. This is what the flat earthers essentially say. If you had a sphere, you could only really be on the top part of it. After all, if you walked close to the edge, you'd go sliding off. And if you had water on this sphere, the water would just go sliding off. That's something that we would experience in real life. That's just the way it would work. Now, when you think about it, science is kind of like a religion. And before anyone gets upset by that, what I mean is that science behaves like a religion. It has many of the same characteristics. In most religions, you'll find there is some kind of a hierarchy. There's priests and there's shamans and teachers, people that either understand the universe, the way things work, God, the law, better than we do. Take the rabbis, for instance. After the second destruction of the temple and they'd lost the Kohen, the Jews had to turn to someone to interpret the law for them, someone who they viewed as understanding more than they did about all this language, which was fairly archaic to them. And they needed someone who they viewed as understanding it better. So, hence the rabbis very much came into power because they could do those interpretations. They were viewed as understanding things better. And if you go to a shaman or a priest, the shamans are touching these higher planes. They're able to bring this knowledge down to you, to people who aren't having mystical experiences like they are. It's generally viewed that priests and pastors, through whatever means, either through more study or prayer or contemplation, have a better understanding of God than they do. And so when you look at science from that perspective, we don't really have a great understanding of science, or at least most of us don't. I have a great fascination with science, and I read quite a few books on the subject. But even when I read Brian Greene's The Elegant Universe, I go all the way through it and read all these fascinating analogies of his where he's trying to explain what these very specialized scientists understand or are hoping that they understand about the universe, and having it somehow make sense to us. But if I flip to the back of the book where he has all of his proofs, his equations that they use to understand these things, I don't have any understanding of those. I can't do that kind of math. I have to pretty much take his word on it. And when you think about how specialized science has become, how even if someone got their doctorate in biology and was extremely well respected in biology, they wouldn't necessarily be able to understand what a quantum physicist was trying to say or what an astrophysicist was trying to say. In fact, an astrophysicist wouldn't necessarily understand what a quantum physicist was trying to say. Things are so specialized these days. So when you think about it, you and I do take a great deal for granted. After all, for all that matters, we haven't even circumnavigated the globe. Most of us haven't. I certainly haven't. I've flown to Europe. I've looked out the window and seen that the world does seem to curve at the horizon, but do I really know that the world is a sphere? Have I gone into space and floated around it? No, we do have to take other people's word for these things. And the flat earthers very simply don't. They see the world as being a disk that's accelerating upwards eternally, and that's their explanation of what gravity is. That could work. After all, Einstein said that you couldn't tell the difference between acceleration and gravity. So, in that respect, that is a great way to describe it. And you could do all the calculations and get essentially the same thing out of it without this whole highly counterintuitive idea of our mass and density displacing enough space and curving space so that it causes what we call gravity and all that kind of thing. We don't need any of that to understand it. It's a very simplistic way of seeing the world around us. They think that Antarctica is essentially in the dead center and it sort of spreads out to the edges where there's this wall, and that's the North Pole. And, that's an interesting way of looking at it. They think that when you think you're going around the world, you're actually going around this plate. Now, you would think that that would run into some real problems. After all, some of them just completely deny that we ever went to the moon, that we ever went into space at all. Some of them accept that we went into space, but say that we don't understand the information they brought back. We have pictures of the Earth from outer space, but they say, well, yes, but you're just seeing a disk. And yes, it appears to be curved, but you're not really seeing a globe. And of course, they are essentially right. After all, when we see pictures of the Earth, we can only see it from one perspective. We can't see it from both sides at once. We never really see a globe. We do see pictures of disks. You could look at it that way. Now, you would think that would break down very quickly when you get more than one picture of the Earth from different perspectives, and obviously you're not going to get this perfect view of this one shot that would sort of show their model where Antarctica was dead in the center and it fanned out. Not to mention the fact that even if you did get a picture like that, it would only show half of our Earth. But whatever, I'm sure they have some explanation for that. Whatever the case, it's an interesting thing to think about simply from that perspective that it is describing a model that you and I could understand without, number one, any scientific knowledge, or number two, like most of us actually do, having to take the scientist's word on these things. Now, some of it is demonstratable, at least in my opinion. For instance, they say, and this is the kind of thing that we thought about when we were kids, if the world was indeed a sphere, and people right after the Copernican model and Galileo started being accepted, and people started saying, yes, it does make sense, the Earth is round, but if it is indeed spinning, it is indeed going around the sun, then we should be able to float up in the air in a hot air balloon and circumnavigate the globe in a day, right? It's spinning underneath us. Well, if you've ever driven in a car at 90 miles an hour, and hopefully not been driving, but perhaps sitting in the back seat, and toss something up in the air, you'll know it doesn't come back and hit you in the face. Because there are things like inertia. There are things that describe why, when we jump up in the air, the Earth doesn't move underneath us. But nevertheless, for the most part, this is something that, like I said, is observable in the normal world. Something that we can wrap our heads around, or at least they can wrap their heads around. And admittedly, most of us do take probably the vast majority of what scientists say just kind of verbatim. We can't really prove what they say. We can't fully understand what they say. We just sort of take it. Some things we understand, some things we don't. And, religion is a lot that way. How can God be three gods in one at the same time? And what the preacher tells us about that might seem pretty counterintuitive, just like most science seems counterintuitive. Ultimately, we are having to take people's word on things. And the flat earthers just aren't willing to take those things for granted. And that's fine. That's how they wish to see things. They're in a vast minority, but, it's interesting that people can still continue to look at a model like that. I certainly have no intention of trying to offend anyone who does believe that. That's not my intention at all. To Mr. Flat Earther, if I offended you in any ways, I do apologize. I am the Urban Omnist, still, as far as I know, existing on a spherical world. But who knows? Maybe one day we'll find it's even more interesting than that. Thank you guys for watching. And guys, please don't forget to support us as much as possible by clicking subscribe, liking us on Facebook and Twitter, and please, 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 please send me those questions right at this address. Thank you very much. Again, I'm the Urban Omnist.